All right, ladies, gentlemen. Ladies, gentlemen, good evening, good Yom Tes. A warm welcome to our Yud Tes Kislev Fabrengen. Before we begin with the proceedings of the evening, there's a little touch and there's a little taste. I'd like to warmly welcome the Tzivos Hashem Achim Choir. Please. Group of boys with beautiful voices who have really worked hard, prepared long. And a very special thanks to Shmuley Goldman and to Yochi Res, to Rabbi Zevi and Marlea Weinberg. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the choir, following which we'll continue. Do it first. Once again, a very warm welcome to everybody who's joined us here this evening. Ladies, gentlemen, fellow Chassidim. It's a special evening, most central one within our community, within the world of Chassidus, within the world of Chabad Chassidus in particular. It's an evening in which we celebrate Pada B'Shalom Nafshi, the evening in which we celebrate the Yortzeit of the Maggid of Mezrich, but as well and possibly primarily the day on which the Alter Rebbe was liberated from prison, Pada B'Shalom Nafshi, his soul, his life, his mandate and his destiny being granted to him successfully, being able to spread the light in the well springs of Chassidus for generations to come uninterruptedly until the coming of Mashiach. I'd like to make particular mention and thanks to two individuals who really gave of themselves in setting up this evening, to Chan Arenstein and to Chani Singer. Your efforts are truly appreciated and a big effort. And of course, to an esteemed gentleman, Holly Farnblom, for your time, for your effort, for your dedication always. Pada B'Shalom Nafshi, David HaMelech discusses in Tehillim his redemption, his salvation. And he describes in the continuation of the Perek the nature of the enemy, the character of the beast that had been so determined to harm and ultimately to attempt and bring about his downfall. And he describes in the Perek, Shalach Yadav B'Shloimei Chilal B'Risai, literally translating the enemy reaching out to the peaceful one, to the man of God, Chilal B'Risai, desecrating the treaty of peace that had existed between them. But it would only be appropriate this evening to make direct mention of Shalach Yadav B'Shloimei, what our entire community has observed and has felt, having seen the unspeakable tragedy. Shalach Yadav B'Shloimei, the hand of a murderer raised against one of our own children, one of our own boys, the loss of our precious Eli K. And from here tonight, we send to his parents, to his grandparents, and to the entire extended family nechumim, comfort, sending them wishes of strength. We're here tonight, the most special evening of the year, with them on our minds, in our thoughts, and very close to our hearts. I'd like to ask Rabbi Mendel Lipsker to please share some divrei chizuk in this regard.
Chaim and Yud Tes. First of all, thank you very much, Rabbi Shachar, and to the Hasidim Shul community for hosting the bringing the Suda this evening, and a huge mazel tov to the Hasidim Shul community for the wonderful purchase just over the road. And may this act of hafetza be a wonderful hatzlacha, begashmius and more so beruchnius, and bring huge nachas to the Rebbe in the fullest sense of the word. One of the things that we learn in Hasidus is the concept of Mesa Hafochim. Here's a good example. Mesa Hafochim is the coexistence of opposite things. And while one would think that opposites cannot coexist, we learn in Chassidus that not only can they coexist, but in actual fact, in the greater scheme of things, they support each other and give each other meaning and purpose. A simple example, Gashmis and Ruchnius, the Neshama and the Guf. But a prerequisite for opposites to coexist is that it has to be within the realm of the world of Tikkun and not Tohu. In the world of Tohu, spiritual chaos, opposites don't coexist. They reject each other, they're in conflict with each other, and ultimately destroy each other and destroy themselves. Whereas within the realm of Tikkun, they do coexist because they recognize how each complements the other. And the overall structure is dependent on the presence of all the opposites coming together. It's Yud Tes Kislev, Chag HaChagim, Chag HaGeula, the day that the Rebbe Rashab describes in the Hagdama to Hayom Yom as the day that we were given the Eir B'chayas Nafshenu, the light and vitality of our lives, of our souls. The day which fulfills the ultimate purpose of creation, in the words of the Rebbe Rashab. A day that Hasidim for so very long would celebrate and continue to celebrate with intense joy. And yet at the very same time, as we've just heard from Rabbi Shachar, our community is shattered, broken, with the terrible news of the murder, of the brutal murder of Eli K., whose life was taken on his way to the case. I'm sure most of you, many of you, followed the Levaya on Zoom yesterday. There were quite a few speeches, but there was one that touched me deeply. I don't know the name of the person who spoke, but he said something. He said that Avi's father, said when he heard the news of a person that was killed on the way to the Kaisel, he mentally made up his mind that he would go to the Levaya, not imagining that it would be the Levaya of his own son. When we initially heard the news that a young man in Yerushalayim was killed and others were injured, we all felt bad. A fellow Jew on the way to the Kaisel, another murdering terrorist dressed as a Jew, killing one of our own. But when we heard the name sometime later, the shock, the grief was unbelievable. We have to feel that way about every Jew, and so we should. But yet human nature is such that when it comes to family, when it comes to those that are close, the pain is so much stronger, so much more intense, and it touches on us on levels which are so much more real. And this is why tonight, Yud Tes Kislev, while on the one hand we're obligated to rejoice with the Geula, the liberation of the Alter Rebbe, which brought about not only a personal Geula or a Geula for a particular group within Yiddishkeit, but changed the world. It was, as I said before, in the words of the Rebbe Rashab, the ultimate purpose, Tachlis Abriya, as he says, the ultimate purpose of creation was revealed on this day through this miracle. And therefore, our joy has to represent that type of intensity and reflect that type of intensity. But at the same time, our community is tzibrochen of shtiker, one of our own, a boy that we saw growing up, playing on these fields, running through these corridors, friends of people sitting around these tables, whose parents and grandparents we know so well, part of our lives in such an intimate way. How can we possibly experience these two extremely opposite emotions at the same time? And this is why we have to turn to the wisdom of Chassidus and say that we live in a world that although there are so many things that we don't understand, in fact, probably most things we don't understand, but we have to rely upon the truth and greatness of the teachings of the Rebbeim, and to try and live in a world of tikkun so that we can handle the opposites when they present themselves, and to understand that each one of those opposites has an ultimate purpose and an actual fact complement each other. And tikkun means creating kalim, big kalim, being vessels that receive. We can't live shallow, vague, empty lives. We have to be receptacles. We have to become attuned to the words and wisdom and beauty and truth of Chassidus and the words of the Rebbeim. Only Hashem can truly heal the brokenhearted. What we can do is to try and understand what we can understand and to try to know what we can know. This afternoon I was busy writing a letter to the community, which I hope I'll finish sometime tonight. But in it I said, and this is important, that Eli was holding his tefillin and a Yud Tes Kislev. And yesterday, I spoke to a chaver of mine whose brother is the Rosh Yeshiva in Kiryat Gat, where Eli learned. And he told him that Eli had a passion for the Teda of the Rebbe. I don't know if he was going to a shir with the Yud Tes Kislev. I'm sure all that will come out, all that information. But I think it would be very fitting, appropriate, that all of us, in memory of his sacred holy neshama, dedicate some of our time to a project that has to do with tefillin and Yud Tes Kislev, the Rebbe's Teda. Because ultimately, that's the only real nechama. That's the only chizuk that we can give each other. We can say words. We can go through the process of time. All that is very superficial. Of course, our hearts go out to the family. We wish that we could find the right words, if we can. We have to do something. Tonight is Yud Tes Kislev. Yud Tes Kislev is the day that we were given the ultimate gift of Chassidus. Eli was walking with a Yud Tes Kislev, a sefer on Chassidus. There's some sort of connection there. I'm going to let you work it out yourselves, and perhaps later on, when people are sitting around in Fabrengen, you can work it out with each other. That's where the answer lies. That's where the nechama, that's where the consolation is. Make it real. Make it personal. It's difficult to have the coexistence of opposites. But as I said before, it's not only possible, it's necessary, because they complement each other with Yad.
Thank you, Rabbi Lipsker. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Rabbi Rolly Resnick. Sorry. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Rabbi Rolly Resnick, Shliach in Tri-Valley, California, Northern California, who's undertaken quite a long journey to travel here, to spend Yud Tes Kislev the days before, surrounding Yud Tes Kislev, to be with us, to uplift, to share, and to inspire, to reach our minds and hopefully touch our hearts too. Those that heard Rabbi Resnick over Shabbos, it was really a wonderful treat. Friday night, Shabbos morning, Sunday morning. I was heard him in Cape Town as well over Sunday and Monday. Rabbi Resnick verbringed with our community whilst we were still in the Zoom era over Yud Aleph Nissen. Thoroughly enjoyed. And since that time, it was our intention to be able to facilitate a visit in person to our community. Rabbi Resnick, we're delighted that you've been able to join us here this evening. We thank you for your efforts. Ladies, gentlemen, Rabbi Roli Resnick. Following Rabbi Resnick's talk, the buffet will be open.
Good Yom Tov. Okay, you can hear me? L'chaim, l'chaim. Rabbi Lipsker, the Rav, Rabbi Shachat, who facilitated this, ladies and gentlemen, Good Yom Tov, thank you very much. Just want to say this is really, Rabbi Lipsker said it to me privately, this is the best kept secret in the world, this community. It really is. So I've been here for a few days. It's truly remarkable and extraordinary. And a big thank you to my host, the Zwicks. They've been treating me like a king. Thank you. They say, Agas faravayel zet a mile. If you're a guest for a while, sees a mile. And it's really the warmth, the enthusiasm, 6 o'clock in the morning, people learning chassidus, minyan, learning, enthusiasm. It's really extraordinary. The high schools, the chayas. And I'm sure every community, I'm sure there's always issues and problems. They call it the missing tile syndrome. When you have a beautiful mosaic of tiles, you have 10,000 tiles, but one is missing. What do you always look at? The missing tile. So we always complain about the missing tile. And I'm sure as good, as better is better. I'm sure things can always be better. But this is truly remarkable and extraordinary. And l'chaim, alei v'hatzliach, from strength to strength. And I told my wife, maybe we'll move down, l'chaim. Okay. There was a venerable chassid, passed away about 18 years ago, Rabbi Zalman Garari. He lived in Crown Heights. And one evening he was headed out to the airport. LaGuardia is an airport in New York. He was headed out to the airport for a trip only to find out that his flight was canceled. It was the last flight of the evening. So he had to take the flight out in the morning. All of us would have hailed a cab, gone back home, and come to the airport in the morning. But not Rabbi Garari. You see, there is a text called Savos Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. In the 12th and 13th generation, the leader of Ashkenazic Jewry, Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi, he wrote a text. It's an ethical will. And in this text, he records various instructions. You probably heard some of them. 2 brothers shouldn't marry 2 sisters, he writes. Don't bury 2 enemies next to each other. I guess they're fighting a lot while they're alive. They don't have to fight down there as well. Don't permanently seal off your window or your doorway. Don't polish your shoes when you're headed on a journey. Many, many instructions. One of the things he writes that when you are heading out on a journey, you shouldn't go back home until you reach your destination. You might actually see people like they head out to shul. If they forget their keys, they won't go back. They'll ask someone to go back home and get their keys for them. Fine. Most of us do not scrupulously today follow these instructions, but Rabbi Garari did. So he's faced with a dilemma. Should he go back home? He hasn't reached his destination, or perhaps he should stay in a hotel near the airport. What should he do? Zalman Garari enjoyed a very unique and close relationship with the Rebbe. And so he phoned the Rebbe's office from a payphone in the airport. Rabbi Chodakov answers the phone. He shares his dilemma. Rabbi Chodakov asks him to please wait on the line. Rabbi Chodakov returns back with the following words. He says, the Rebbe has said that you are to study a chapter of Tanya. For when one studies a chapter of Tanya, one becomes a new person. And then the person who left will not be the same person who is returned. I open with this anecdote tonight because the Rebbe was not one to say cute things, to say things in jest, to exaggerate, to make people feel good. If he said it, he meant it. He meant that studying a chapter of Tanya is transformative and can actually change your life. It's a life-changing experience. So tonight, for a few minutes, if you'll allow me, the planes are flying, I'd like to talk about how, at least I think in a certain way, Chassidus Tanya can indeed be transformative and life-changing. There's an incredible letter, a letter that I read often. The Rebbe penned this letter 6 months before he became Rebbe. And the question is from a man who has recently lost his father. He has to say Kaddish. In the 1950s in America, the stockyards where the animals were leaving the urban areas and moving out to rural America. And he had received a job offer to be a shoichet, but he would not be able to have a minyan because he'd have to live in a place without a minyan. He has brothers who do live in a place with a minyan, so they can say Kaddish for the father. But he writes to the Rebbe that if I take this job, I'll be able to support my family. I'll also be able to pay off the debts. He had taken out debts to bury his father. So they are loans. I'll be able to pay off the loans. And he's asking the Rebbe, should we be able to do this? This is the letter. The letter is 4 paragraphs. The first 3 paragraphs of the letter, the Rebbe tells him, it's very special that you have brothers who can say Kaddish. That's much better than having someone who's not a family member saying Kaddish. And the Rebbe has many sources for the value of family members saying Kaddish. The Rebbe tells him that it's very important that you pay off the debts and fund the funeral. That also is spiritually important. The Rebbe tells him if you can't lead the service, you can't be the chazan, at least give tzedakah when you're davening. At least read the Mishnayos, study the Mishnayos. Interestingly, the Rebbe says also lead the benching. If you can't lead the davening, lead the benching. 3 full paragraphs all about this. And then comes the last paragraph of the letter. And the Rebbe begins the paragraph. It's in Hebrew, but I'll translate it loosely in English. The Rebbe says, I write all of the above because I am unfamiliar with your level of trust in God. But if you have strong trust in God, then you'll trust that he'll be able to find you a job in a place with a minyan. You'll be able to pay back the loans and you'll be able to support your family. Which means, dear friends, in simple English, there are 2 modes of living. There are 2 planes we can live on. We can live within the sphere of law and order, governed by the laws of nature that God has woven within creation, and it works. You can deal with that nature. You can work through it. You can take the job. You can pay the loans. You can say Kaddish, and your father's neshama will have an aliyah. That will work. But there's another way of living. You can live on a different level. You can see life through a different lens. And perhaps that's what the Rebbe was trying to tell Zalman Garari. Study a chapter of Tanya. You'll learn that the God who created this world, that the God who created the nature of this world, Elohim, is not limited by that nature. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. You'll learn that every Jew has a chelek elikam mimal, that every Jew is endowed with a piece of God that is also not limited by the nature of this world. And therefore, indeed, Chassidus and Tanya can be life-changing. Let me explain a little bit further. Those of you who've known, I've told a few stories here. My father, may he rest in peace, had the pleasure and the honor to be the Rebbe's personal physician when the Rebbe had a heart attack in 1977. My father grew up in America in an Orthodox household, standard American 1950 public school cheder household. My mother, may she be well, is a balas tshuva. We all know that balei tshuva have a certain zest, a certain energy, a certain exuberance for life, for Yiddishkeit. There was a doctor, his name was Dr. Schuster. He lives in Miami. He's a plastic surgeon. And the Rebbe had told him something to the effect of, you make people look very good, you should also look very good. You should have a beard. Okay. So my mother, may she be well, once, I used the word complained to the Rebbe and said, listen, you encourage Dr. Schuster to have a beard. Now, my father did not wear a yarmulke at work. I remember as a kid when he would eat lunch, my father would close the office door, put on a yarmulke, make a bracha, he would eat. But when he saw patients, he did not wear a yarmulke. This was before all the various movements of being proud, pride movements of your ethnicity. Everyone, it was a melting pot. America was more of a melting pot. And people sort of tried to fit in. You didn't see many doctors in Cornell University and those likes with a yarmulke. My father did not wear a yarmulke. So my mother said to Rebbe, how come you encourage Dr. Schuster to have a beard? and you don't encourage my husband to wear a yarmulke at work. Okay. The Rebbe, again, I'm not quoting verbatim. The Rebbe said, I know your husband, and I know that he is going to feel self-conscious if he has a yarmulke on. And he has a Torah obligation. The Torah says, V'rape yirape. A physician has an obligation to heal his patients. And if he's going to wear a yarmulke, that's going to interfere with his ability to be a doctor. Fine. Okay. Fast forward the late 1980s. President Bush Sr. had a thyroid condition. He had an overacting thyroid, and they didn't know why it was. They couldn't figure it out. My father happens to be a specialist in endocrinology and hypertension. This was one of his fields of expertise. And so he was called in to consult on the president's case. I, by the way, was really excited that my father was seeing the president. This was very exciting for me as a kid. My father gets a call from Maskiris, from the Rebbe's secretariat. The Rebbe has said that when you go to see the president, you should please wear a yarmulke. Now, in addition to the obvious lesson, and that is that we as Jews represent Judaism, we represent God, and we ought to use that in our sphere of influence. But I want to ask you a question. This is a question that bothers me. I don't understand something. If my father wearing a yarmulke is going to interfere with his ability to treat the patient, shouldn't that concern be amplified exponentially so if your patient is the president of the United States of America, the leader of the free world? Why wasn't the Rebbe concerned that the yarmulke would interfere with him treating the president? It's a good question, no? He said the Rebbe didn't like the president. L'chaim. So hold this question off for a second, and please, ladies and gentlemen, allow me for 2 minutes to touch upon an idea in Chassidus that we're all familiar with. And that is as follows. 2 minutes. In the lexicon and the vernacular of Chassidus, we see this world through the lens of 2 words, or and keli, light, energy, and containers. I'm talking to you now. I'm conveying an idea. That's the right? I'm using words. Those words are containers, kelim. You have a composer. A composer has inspiration. That's the Then the composer puts that inspiration within musical notes. That's the keli. Each of us have a soul, have an That soul is contained within a body, a keli. A nation has patriotism, has resolve. That's expressed within their anthem, within their flag, within their army, etc., etc. Now, the keli is very important. It would be really hard for you to understand what I'm saying now if I didn't use words. It would be really hard to appreciate the inspiration of the composer if he didn't put it in musical notes. It would be really hard to see me if I didn't have a body on now. You've never seen the way I look without a body on. So kelim are important. But dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, one of the biggest problems all of us face, one of the biggest problems we face is that we fail to see the behind the kelim. We fail to recognize that there is light and there is within every single container. So we look at the world and we don't see the godly vivifying force that's pulsating within creation. We just see atoms and molecules. We look at ourselves and we don't see our neshama. We identify ourselves as our guf, as our body. In 1973, in Stockholm, a convict who was on parole robbed the bank and held 4 employees, 3 women and 1 man, at gunpoint for 6 days. Held them as hostage. After the hostages were released, the world observed a very bizarre psychological phenomenon. And that was that the hostages started to identify with their captor. They refused to testify against him, and they actually raised money for his defense. Of course, this syndrome has become known as the Stockholm Syndrome. Well, guess what? All of us face this similar symptom. You see, our neshamas, our souls, are taken hostage in our bodies. we are in hostage in our bodies. And you know what? We start identifying with our bodies. We start looking at ourselves as if we are bodies instead of seeing ourselves as our soul. And when we look at ourselves and we don't see our neshamas, when we fail to recognize that we are a neshama, then we have anxiety, self-consciousness, we have depression. When you look at the world and you don't see the godly force within it, then you get intimidated by the world. You know the story of the Chelm, the guy, the chassid from Chelm? He's on a train. He's on a train at night. And in the same car that he's in is a Russian officer. The two of them are in the car at night. It's a night train ride. The Chelm chassid goes to the conductor and says, please, my stop is at 4 a.m. Please wake me up. Okay. 4 a.m. Knocks on the door, wakes up the Chelm chassid. The chassid, instead of putting on his garb, puts on the Russian officer's clothing. When he gets to Chelm, everyone looks at him and says, Yaakov, what happened? Doesn't know what everybody's looking at. He goes to daven, he goes to shul, puts on film. Everybody's looking at him like he's a meshuggah. He comes home. His wife says, Yaakov, what happened? He says, I don't know. Everybody thinks I'm crazy. What is? Yaakov, look in the mirror. He looks in the mirror. He says, oh my gosh, the conductor forgot to wake me up. He woke up the Russian officer instead. Now, we do the same thing. We identify with our body. Do you know, by the way, Hillel Hazak and Hillel Levit, do you know when he used to eat? Do you know what he used to say? Before he would eat, he would say, excuse me, I got to go feed him. I'll be back. That's not me. That's my body. I'm an neshama. I happen to carry around the body and I have to take care of it. But that's not who I am. I don't identify with that. That's not who I am. I have a friend, David, who tells me, Rabbi, you can never argue with Chabad rabbis. I say, what do you mean? He says, I went to my rabbi and I asked him, I said, I have doubts. I'm not sure. I'm skeptical. I don't know if I believe in God. And the rabbi sat down with me for 3-4 hours. We argued. We had a theological argument about the arguments pro or against the existence of a creator. It was great. He said, then I went to my Chabad rabbi. And I said, Rabbi, I have doubts. I'm not sure if I believe in God. And the Chabad rabbi says, of course you do. Say l'chaim. He says, Rabbi, what do I say to that? I can't argue with that. They tell the story. There was a Mizrahi, modern Orthodox couple, and their son was becoming bar mitzvah. And they really weren't sure which direction he was headed in. They decided they're going to perform a litmus test. On the morning of his bar mitzvah, they're going to put on the kitchen counter, they're going to put down a Gemara, $100 bill, and a shot of vodka. And they're going to see what happens. If he opens the Gemara, that means he's really going to be a very learned Talmud Chacham, a learned guy. Okay. If he takes the $100 bill, at least he'll be a good Jewish businessman. But if he drinks the shot of vodka, then they know they're in for a rough teenage few years. Okay. The morning of the bar mitzvah, the father and mother are hiding in the closet, anxiously awaiting to see what's going to happen. Their son comes down the stairs. The first thing he does is he opens the Gemara. The parents are shining with nachas, beautiful. Then he takes the $100 bill and gently puts it in his pocket. Then he takes the shot of vodka and drinks it. And the father turns to the mother and says, uh-oh. She says, what's the problem? He says, he's going to be a Chabad rabbi. So, one of the things that Chassidus does for us is that the more you learn, you start looking at the world, you see the aur, you see the light, you're not intimidated, you're not self-conscious. Perhaps when the Rebbe was telling my father, when you go to the president, you wear a yarmulke, that won't interfere. There are times in life when you can raise yourself up. When we learn Chassidus, we connect and we're able to see. You look around the world, you don't see a world. You see the godly force. You don't see this world as a separate entity. We see ourselves as a neshama. We're not intimidated. The Baal Shem Tov, we all know when he was 4 or 5 years old, the last things his father told him were, don't be scared of anything. Because there is nothing. Nothing exists outside of the Eibishter. Nothing exists outside of Hashem. And of course, this really is what Yud Tes Kislev, the mantra, the theme, the chorus of Yud Tes Kislev. What is it? Pada b'shalom nafshi. David HaMelech was facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. His very own son, Avshalom, one of the most charismatic personalities in all of Tanakh, usurped the throne, staged a revolt, a revolution. David's own trusted advisor, a man by the name of Achitophel, joined the enemy. David was really in a corner. And what did David do? He davened, and he was answered. Pada b'shalom nafshi. He didn't struggle. He didn't fight. He just saw all these struggles as Kalim. He was able to see the Ur. He was able to see the light within. There's a very famous Mishnah. Many of us know it. The Mishnah gives us two statements. In Brachas, the Mishnah says, first it begins and says, the early Chassidim, the early pious and righteous individuals, they would spend an hour before davening, directing their hearts towards God. Essentially, they would learn Chassidus before davening. That's statement number one in the Mishnah. Statement number two in the Mishnah says that when you're davening Shemona Esrei, if the king comes to greet you, don't answer him. Even if the snake is wrapped around your ankle, don't stop. Not a poisonous snake, but a snake. Two seemingly independent statements. But if you think about it, they're actually one Mishnah. The Mishnah is telling us, what is the secret to life? The secret to not be intimidated when the king comes towards you. The secret to not be intimidated by all the distractions out there. What is the secret to not be depressed and anxious and self-conscious when the snakes of life wrap themselves around our ankles? When we're faced with challenges? You know the answer to that? Spend an hour before davening. Spend an hour before davening learning. And then when you daven, you won't be telling God how big your problems are. You'll be telling your problems how big God is. That's what Chassidus does. It allows us to see this world through a different vantage point. In 1949, the previous Rebbe became a citizen of this country. Many of you have all seen the video. They actually came, the immigration officers came to 770 so that the previous Rebbe could sign the papers. But evidently beforehand, they had to sign some preliminary papers, which had to be signed in the office in Manhattan. And the one who represented the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, was the saintly, aged Reb Shmuel Levitin, the senior chassid. This is a man who was a chassid of the Rebbe Maharash, and he traveled to Manhattan to be able to sign these papers. This is a man who never ascended higher probably than a 3-4 story building in his life, never was on an airplane. And he took along with him some of the younger boys. I think Rabbi Groner from Australia was there, Rabbi Feldman from Maryland was there with him, and they traveled to Manhattan. And this is his first time going up on a skyscraper, on a big building. And he gets up to the top, and he turns to the boys, and in Yiddish he says, "Az meheb zichuf, wird ganz olam haza a bissel kleiner." When you lift yourself up, this entire world seems a lot smaller. That's what we're trying to do tonight. Tonight is Yud Tes Kislev. These days have potency within them. These days, the tefillos, the words we share, the l'chaims we share, there's tremendous energy. This is the day that we make hachlatas, and we decide we are going to have limud achsidus and dark achsidus. We're going to lift ourselves up. We're going to dedicate ourselves to see the world in a way that we see the Or, not the Keli. This is our mission. This is our mandate. This is what we do. I see on your paper, on the tables, that these papers are the Der Hair. I don't know if you subscribe to it, but I'll make a plug. You read these, you read them, you get them monthly. They lift you up. They put you in a different frame of mind. I recently just concluded the book from Rabbi Shalom Mordechai Rabashkin. It just came out a few months ago. You see a man who goes through so many tzaras in his life, and each time he's there, he's thinking, and he goes through literally the meditative process of how he sees God within his life, within himself, within creation, and it lifts him up, it elevates him, it takes him to a new plateau. This is what we come together today, Chassidim. We come together to strengthen each other with Avas Achim, with Avas Reim, and we come together to be able to overcome, to be able to see the aura, the light that exists within ourselves and within creation. I want to conclude with just one story, and then the Fabregan will continue. The story took place about 25 years ago in America, in Alaska. As you all know, in the summer months, many Bachrim go on Merkez Shlichus. They spend the summer traveling to communities that don't have an established presence. They visit Eden one by one, inspire them and move them, encourage them to grow in Torah mitzvahs. One summer I spent in Tokyo, and people go to all various corners of the world. There were two boys. They were spending their summer on the west coast of Alaska. They were going from town to town, from village to village. They get to one specific town. They can't find any Jews. They go to the petrol station, they go to the pub, they go here, they go there, looking in the phone book phone books, may they rest in peace, but remember those phone books? looking for Goldbergs, Goldsteins, Cones, nothing. At that time, the school year had already begun in Alaska. So they thought of the following idea. They said, you know what? They came to the principal of the school and they said, I'm sure you like exposing your student body to multicultural and ethnic backgrounds. We are a weird species of people called Hasids, and we can give a demonstration of what a Hasid looks like. Okay. The principal was excited, a new species in town. And so the two yeshiva students speak in front of the fourth grade class. It didn't sound as weird as they wanted it to be. They talked about morality, God, giving of the Torah. And at the end of their presentation, they talked about the Jewish people. And they said, do any of you know anybody who's Jewish? One of the girls in the class lifts her head. She says, I do. She points to the teacher. My mommy, she's Jewish. Caught by the admission of your own child. The boys said, we'd love to talk to you. She says, after class, after class. Indeed, after class, they got together. They went to her home and she told her story. She says, I grew up in New York, a very Jewish area. I ran away from it all. I married out, and I've been here for the last decade and a half or so. They spent the afternoon together, reminiscing, inspiring, talking. And as the boys were ready to leave, she turns to them and she says, my daughter's not going to see a Jew again until maybe she goes off to college. Could you share something with her that will last with her for the rest of her life? Now, you're a 20-year-old yeshiva student. You have to tell something to a fourth grader that it's going to last for the rest of your life. I have no idea what I would say. But sometimes God puts the right things in your mind. They go to the car. They took out 2 candlesticks. They gave one to the mother and one to the daughter. And they said as follows. Every week when Shabbos begins, it begins in New Zealand, in Australia. That's the first place on earth where the peace, the tranquility of Shabbos rests on this earth. Then Shabbos travels across, comes to Asia, moves across to Eretz Yisrael. Finally, Bnei Brak and Tel Aviv are quiet. God is starting to enjoy himself a little bit. Moves across South Africa. Europe is now quiet. And finally, Shabbos moves across to New York. Borough Park is shut down and God is really enjoying himself. It moves across to California, to Alaska. The last place on earth, the last place where there's Shabbos is the west coast of Alaska. Light these candles. You'll be completing God's Shabbos. And with that, they left. They went back to Morristown, New Jersey, where they were in yeshiva. And a month later, they receive a postcard in the mail. And it read something like this. Rabbis, I can't thank you enough for your visit. It was memorable, and it brought so much of my Judaism and my youth back to me. Thank you. Please, when you come again, do visit. P.S. Every Friday as the sun sets over the hills in Alaska, my daughter is pulling on my shirt, and my daughter is saying, Mommy, Mommy, God is waiting for us. He's waiting for us to light the candles. Let's complete his Shabbos. There have been generations and generations of light that's been in this world. Shabbos has almost completely enveloped this world. The Rebbe told us, it's it, this is it. A little bit more Ur. If we just don't look at the Kalim in our life, we look at the Ur. We don't get caught up in all the narishkeit and the stupidities. If we're able to see the Ur, then truly this year of Shabbos, it's a year of Shemitah. We've gone through so much. The world is in such upheaval. May we complete Hashem Shabbos, the ultimate Shabbos that we've been waiting for so long. This is the dream. The Alter Rebbe sacrificed his life so that we can be here tonight and finally bring it home. Good Yom Tov, everybody, and thank you very much. Good Yom Tov.
Quickly come.
Guys, get out. I think you have a Resnick and the boys choir will conclude with just one more song.
Where's my speaker? Where's my speaker?
Help.